Hello cellmates, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to share with you my top 20 PowerPoint hacks for 2021. And we have so much to cover, so let's dive straight in. Tip number 1, crop and fill. Sometimes it can look really effective to use a high quality image as the background of your slide. So we're going to jump up to insert and we're just going to insert an image from the stock library. I think we're going to choose this one just here. Now notice when I insert this, we have a small problem. The image doesn't completely fill the background of the slide, so we end up with this white space on the edges. Now the wrong way to resize this would be to drag these resize handles out because you're going to stretch and distort that image. So let's do this the correct way by utilizing crop and fill. We need to click on the image, click the lower half of the crop button and select fill. This is going to give us these black handles which we can just drag out to fill that space. Once we're happy, we can select crop and fill again, make any final adjustments to that position and then click the crop button once we're happy. And there we go, in a few small steps we have a perfectly cropped image. This technique can also be used to fill shapes. So click on the shape, right click the mouse and select Format Shape. We're going to choose to fill with a picture or texture and then we're going to insert a new image from our local drives and let's select this lady just here. Notice that currently she's all distorted, so if we go back to picture format, we can use the same technique to crop and fill. Let's reposition her very slightly. Once we're happy, click the top half of the crop button, and there we have our perfectly cropped image. Tip 2, transparent shape overlays. If you have decided to use a high quality image as the background to your slide, you might come across a bit of a problem when you want to start adding text over the top. Depending on the image that you're using, some images can be quite contrasty, contain lots of different colors. Sometimes the text that you put over the top can get a little bit lost. It doesn't really stand out. Now there are a few different ways that you can prevent this from happening. You might want to start adjusting the transparency of this picture, but the technique that I prefer to use is a very simple one, and that is to create a transparent shape overlay. So all we're going to do here is click Insert, go to Shapes. I'm going to choose the rectangle tool and draw a big old rectangle right over the top of the background. I'm going to fill this with a different color, so let's do a dark gray. Right click and go back into Format Shape. What you'll notice at the bottom is we have a transparency slider, so I can drag this up or down and really choose how much of that background image I want peeking through. And I tend to prefer this technique rather than making adjustments to the actual image behind, simply because it gives me a little bit more control and I can also choose the color of that overlay. So I'm going to set it to 26%, and then anything I choose to overlay over the top really stands out as opposed to blending into the background. Tip number 3, shape layers. Every object that you place on your slide is effectively on its own layer. So here I have 3 different shapes, just 3 different colored circles, and each one of them is on its own separate layer. So the orange circle is on the top layer, the blue in the middle, and the green is right at the back. So up to Shape Format, and let's open up the selection pane. And you'll be able to see in here all of the different objects that you have contained on the slide. And I've already renamed 2 of them, so here we've got the title and then the subheading. And what I would recommend that you do is go through and give all of the objects on your slide a meaningful name so it's easy for you to identify them. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to rename the 3 ovals. Now these are a little bit easier for me to identify. I can manage my layers from within this selection pane. So if I want to make some edits to the blue circle just here, it's currently hidden beneath the orange circle. What I can do is I can choose to hide the orange circle temporarily by clicking on the eye in the selection pane. I can make my changes and then unhide the orange circle. If I want to reorder these objects, I can simply drag and drop. So if I want to bring that green circle to the front, I can select it and drag it above the orange circle. I can then drag the blue circle to reorder again. So the selection pane is a great way for you to keep track of your different layers, give them meaningful names, and reorder and select layers. Tip number 5, aligning objects. Nothing screams unprofessional than receiving a presentation where all of the objects are not aligned correctly. And we have so many tools in PowerPoint that are going to help us align our objects so that everything looks nice and slick, clean and professional. So here I have 4 objects on my slide, 4 squares. I'm going to select them all by holding down my Shift key, and I'm going to align them to the dead center of this slide. So up to the Arrange drop down and all the way down to Align. The first thing I'm going to do here is align them to the middle. Now notice that I have inconsistent spacing between each of my objects. Not a problem, back to Arrange, into Align, Distribute horizontally to make that space even. If I now want to position these in the dead center of the slide, I'm going to need to group them together by pressing Ctrl G. That essentially makes them one object. I can then go back to Arrange, down to Align, Align Center, and then Align Middle. Ctrl Shift G to ungroup those objects. Tip number 5, using the eyedropper utility. The eyedropper in PowerPoint helps you achieve a consistent look and feel in your slides. For example, I can take one of the colors that's already in use in the slide and apply it to something else. So maybe I want to fill these 4 shapes with a color from the background so that everything melds together nicely. Well, it's very simple. I can select all 4 of my shapes, up to Shape Format, into Fill, and we're going to use Eyedropper. Now notice when I select Eyedropper, my cursor changes to a little pipette icon, and as I move around the image, you can see in the little preview square, it's showing what color I'm going to pick up when I click. So let's choose a nice bright color. I'm going to go for this bright blue, click, and it's going to fill the shapes with that color. Tip number 6, merging shapes. Another cool feature in PowerPoint is the ability to merge shapes together and even create your own new shapes. So currently I have 2 independent shapes on this slide. I'm going to place them slightly over each other, select them both by holding down the Shift key, and from the Shape Format ribbon I have a Merge Shapes drop down, and from here there are a few different things that I can do. I could choose Union, which is going to merge the 2 shapes together and make them one new shape. Combine is going to combine them in an entirely different way. I could choose Fragment, which is essentially going to split this shape up and make it lots and lots of different independent shapes, which I can then format individually. Intersect I'm going to show you in a moment, and then finally we have Subtract, which is going to just remove the rectangle and leave what's left. So lots of different ways there to create different kinds of shapes. Now another use for the Intersect tool that can be quite interesting is I could take something like a piece of text and I can fill it with an image by using Intersect. So here I've just drawn a shape, I've filled it with an image, I'm going to place it over the top of this number 3 and I'm going to send it to the back. I'm then going to select both the image and the number, and from Merge Shapes, when you select Intersect, you're going to get that lovely effect of having that image inside the number. Tip number 7, Morph and Advanced Morph. The Morph transition is one of those newer features that have been added into PowerPoint, and it really helps you give a nice animated look and feel to your slides. But did you know that there is also an Advanced Morph option? Let's start out by taking a look at what Morph does, and then I'll show you an example of Advanced Morph. So on this slide, I have a couple of images of my team members. And what I've basically done here is I've duplicated this slide because on this one, I really just want to focus on Natalie. And you can see here that the difference between the two is that Natalie's image is a little bit larger and Matt's is smaller, and I've also added some text. Once I've made my changes, if I select both of these slides and apply the Morph transition, you can see the effect that that gives. Let's just quickly run the slideshow so you can see that again. The slide starts like this, but when we click to move on to the next slide, we get that nice animated effect. So that is Morph. But what is Advanced Morph all about? Well, Advanced Morph will basically transform a shape into another shape. And again, this is a really cool little effect. So here you can see I have Natalie on this slide. I've duplicated the slide and I've added matte into a hexagon shape onto that second slide. Now the key here is if you want to use advanced morph, you need to click on the first shape, jump into your selection pane, and then rename the shape. And there is a very specific format that you need to use if you want to invoke advanced morph. Everything has to start with double exclamation point, and I'm just going to call this shape. Let's go on to the next slide and do the same thing. So where we have matte, I'm going to rename this to double exclamation mark shape. So now both of these are named the same thing. I'm going to select both of the slides and apply the morph transition. Let's take a look at what the effect is. We're going to run the slideshow. And when I click to move on to the next slide, you'll see that it kind of morphs into that new shape. So that is morph and advanced morph. Tip number 8, replacing fonts. Many times you might receive a presentation from a client or another colleague and you're going to need to replace the fonts. Maybe you use a completely different font style to the presentation that you've received, and instead of going through each slide, selecting the text and changing the font, we have a quick way of doing that in PowerPoint. All we need to do is jump up to the Home tab, over to the Editing group and click the Replace drop-down. Let's choose Replace Fonts, and we can then choose the font style that we want to replace. So I'm going to replace Times New Roman with the font that I prefer to use, which is Lato. Click on Replace, and it's as simple as that. Tip number 9, setting a default shape. Another thing you might notice when you draw shapes on your slide is that you will always get the default formatting based off of the template that you're currently using in PowerPoint. So when I draw shapes, they're always this blue color with a very slight border. And usually what I end up doing is going in and changing the fill every single time to something more appropriate. Now you don't need to do that. What you can do is you can set a default shape. So if there is specific formatting that you always use for your shapes, you can set that as the default and it effectively overrides your theme settings. So let's make some changes to this shape. I'm going to make it dark red, and let's give it an outline, quite a thick outline, and let's make that outline black. Maybe that is the shape that I always use. Right click on the shape and choose Set as Default Shape, and then the next time you go to draw a shape, it's going to use that formatting. Tip number 10, lock drawing mode. Staying on the subject of shapes, you may also have noticed that when you draw shapes, you can only draw them once. So if I was to draw a rectangle and let go, you can see that the Shape tool is now deactivated. So if I want to draw another shape, I have to go back to Insert and select the shape again. Now that can be a little bit annoying, particularly if you're trying to draw lots of shapes on a slide. So we can get around that by locking the drawing mode. So let's click the Shapes drop down, let's right click on the shape and say Lock Drawing Mode. I can now carry on drawing until my heart's content, and it's not going to deactivate until I press the Escape key on my keyboard. Tip number 11, Slide Zoom. Slide Zoom is one of the newer features in PowerPoint, and I really love it because it effectively allows the viewer to choose their own route through your presentation. So this kind of reminds me a little bit of those choose your own story books that I used to read when I was younger. So let's see how it works. Let's jump up to Insert, and in the Links group we have a Zoom drop down. Now there are 3 different kinds of zoom that you can do: summary, section and slide. I would encourage you to investigate these others. We're going to take a look at Slide Zoom. This is going to pop open the Insert Slide Zoom window where you can then choose the slides that you want to display on this main page. So let's choose, I'm going to choose slide 1, 2, 3 and 4 and click on Insert. What you're going to get is a thumbnail version of the slide. And what you'll also notice is that you get your dedicated zoom ribbon at the top. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a zoom border so that these stand out from the background of the slide. I'm going to position these nicely on my page, and to do this I'm going to be using my smart guides. And you might choose to position these on a navigation page. So maybe at the start of your presentation, you have a slide and it says choose what you're interested in, and then you can insert the different slides that people can click on. So let's run this presentation. I can now choose my path through the presentation. So maybe I'm interested in filling shapes with images. I can click on that and it's going to zoom directly into that slide. One thing I would say is if you want to bounce back out of that zoom and go back to that main page so you can select another slide, you need to make sure that you set that option from the zoom ribbon. So we want to select Return to Zoom on each of these. Now when we run the slideshow, when we zoom into a specific slide, if we click again, it's going to bounce us back out to that main page. Tip number 12, adding a countdown timer. Something that can really extend your capabilities when you're working in PowerPoint is add-ins. And there are so many cool add-ins for PowerPoint that they require their own separate video. But I've just picked a couple to demonstrate to you here. And the first one is adding a countdown timer to your slides. So we're going to go up to the Insert ribbon, and in the Add-ins group, let's say Get Add-ins. In the search box, I'm going to search for Countdown and hit Enter, and it's actually this one we want here, Break Time. Let's click on Add and continue to load up that add-in. And what this basically is a countdown timer. You can see at the bottom, it's set to 10 minutes, but I could change that. I can click Start and it's going to start to count down. I can also change the type. So if we're counting down to our next coffee break, I can choose the coffee theme. If we're counting down to lunch, maybe I want to use the lunch theme. And this is just a really nice thing that you might want to place behind you when you're giving a presentation so that everybody knows when they're going to be able to go and get some coffee. Tip 13, Kiosk slides. Kiosk slides are something that I've used for years, and really they are simply a custom slideshow. If you're hosting a meeting or some kind of presentation or training session, there's always going to be a few minutes of dead time at the beginning whilst you're waiting for all of the attendees to arrive. So instead of having people just sitting there bored looking at their phones, it's a nice idea to create a custom slideshow and have something interesting for them to look at whilst they're waiting for the presentation to begin. So those slides might contain something like your contact details. You might want to give them some tips and tricks. You might even want to give them something to think about and pose them some questions prior to that meeting starting. You might even want to add a slide with some kind of inspirational quote. Whatever it is, create the slides first of all and then set them up as a custom slideshow. So let's jump up to Slideshow, into Custom Slideshow, Custom Shows, and we're going to create a new show. I'm going to call it My Intro, and the slides that I'm going to use are slides 21, 22 and 23. Once you've created the slideshow, you're going to need to go into Setup Slideshow and make sure that we're choosing to use our custom show. I'm going to say loop continuously until escape and click on OK. And the final thing I want to do is I want to set up some timings. In general, you don't want to have to click to move these slides on. You're going to want them to cycle round at, say, 5-second intervals. So let's go to Rehearse Timings. You can see that timer in the top corner. I'm going to cycle every 3 seconds. And then we have the final slide. Once we get to 3 seconds, I'm going to hit the escape. I'm going to say yes to save those slide timings. And now, when I run my slideshow, you'll see that these automatically cycle through every 3 seconds. So I can just have these up behind me on the screen, and because they're looping until escape, they'll just go round and round and round until I start the presentation. One little tip here though is when you actually want to go into your actual presentation, you must remember to go back into Setup Slideshow and select to show all slides. Otherwise, it's just going to play your custom slideshow over and over again. Tip 14, using the designer. If you're a bit stuck for ideas when it comes to your slide layout, you can use the Design Ideas pane to help you out. And the cool thing about this is it pops up automatically whenever you add something onto your slide. For example, if we go to the Insert tab, and again, let's just add a stock image, and I'm going to use this cactus just here, why not? Let's click on Insert. And you'll notice Design Ideas pops open on the right hand side. And this gives me a few different ideas with regards to layout, and if I decide I like one of them, I can just select it, and we have a really effective looking image. Tip 15, rehearse with coach. Before you give a presentation, it's always a good idea to practice. And the Rehearse with Coach option in PowerPoint is a great little utility that allows you to go through your presentation and it will give you real-time feedback and suggestions as to how you can improve. And the even cooler thing is that at the end you receive a report, which basically helps you find out the effectiveness of your presentation. So let's take a look at how this works. We're going to go to the slideshow ribbon and select Rehearse with Coach. So now I'm into my presentation. I have this little box at the bottom and I have Show Real-Time Feedback ticked. So when I click Start Rehearsing, PowerPoint is basically listening to everything that I'm saying and it's going to provide me with real-time feedback. So you can see here it's telling me to try speaking a little bit slower. So if I speak really slowly or really quickly, it's going to give me that feedback. It also picks up on other things such as your tone or if the language that you're using is appropriate. So this is a really great way of just getting some feedback because sometimes it's quite difficult to know if you speak too fast or too slow or if you need to vary your pitch. Once you've finished, we can click Escape and it's going to load up your rehearsal report, which gives you a bit of insight into how effective your presentation style is. Tip number 16, screenshots. Most of us are fairly familiar these days with taking screenshots and inserting them into different applications. But one of the cool things with PowerPoint is that we can insert a screenshot directly from within PowerPoint, so no messing around with the print screen key or anything like that. From the Insert tab, we have a screenshot option. We can choose screen clipping, and basically it will minimize PowerPoint and reveals whatever you have behind. So whatever you want to take a screen clipping of, make sure you have that open behind PowerPoint. Now I just have my desktop background, but that's okay because I want to take a screen clipping of my logo. So all I need to do now is drag my mouse over, and when I let go, it's going to paste that directly into PowerPoint. Tip 17, inserting forms. You can add interactivity into your PowerPoint presentation by inserting Microsoft Forms directly into your slides. And we do this using another add-in. So let's go back up to Insert and into Get Add-ins. And I'm going to search for Forms. And the top one here is Microsoft Forms. So let's click on Add and Continue. Now this little add-in relies on you having access to Microsoft Forms via Microsoft 365. So I do, and I have it open behind just here, and I've already created my form within Microsoft Forms. Once you've created the form, if you click Share, you can then copy the URL, come back to PowerPoint and just paste that in, Control V. And it's going to insert that form directly into your PowerPoint presentation. So if we click Get Started, it loads up the form. This window can be resized, and then anybody who's running this presentation can interact with the form by making selections. Tip number 18, free resources. I'm a big fan of free things, and that includes images, icons, templates that are going to be helpful when I'm working with PowerPoint. And some of the resources that I use for images and icons, we can now add into PowerPoint as add-ins. For example, all of the images that I use in general come from the pexels.com website. It's a really great website that has hundreds and hundreds of high quality free images that you can use. The Noun Project is another website that contains thousands of different icons that you can download for free, or alternatively you can pay a small subscription to have access to the entire library. So what we can do is we can go to Insert and say Get Add-ins, and there are add-ins for both of these applications. So if we type in Pexels, there it is. I can click Add and Continue. Notice that it's now been added to my ribbon. I can do exactly the same for the Noun Project. And now I have easy access to both of these. So if I want to insert a high quality image, I can open Pexels. It's going to open in the pane at the side, and I can go through and search for any image I like, and it just makes the whole process a lot quicker. Tip number 19, removing a background. Now, PowerPoint isn't Photoshop. Let's just get that straight right off the bat. but you do have the ability to remove a background from an image. Now, I will say how successful you are using PowerPoint to do this really does depend on the image. I find that if the image has a fairly plain background, you can normally get a pretty decent result. So let's take a look at how it works. I'm going to insert a picture that I've got stored off to my local drives. And it's this picture of a kingfisher. Now I want to remove this yellow background and place this kingfisher on an entirely different background. So let's select the picture up to picture format, and the first option on this ribbon is remove background. So PowerPoint makes its best attempt to remove that background. I can see it hasn't got it quite right, but we can make some adjustments here. So I'm going to say mark areas to keep, and we're going to draw a line and try and make the line as straight as possible to let PowerPoint know that we want to keep that part of the image. I'm going to do the same down here. That looks a lot better. I need to switch to mark areas to remove the rest of this yellow. And there we go. It's done a fairly decent job. Let's say keep changes. And there we go. I have a lovely image of a kingfisher without its background. I could then go a stage further and let's choose open pixels. We're going to search for an image of a jungle, hit enter. Let's choose something like that. We're going to use our crop and fill trick to fill this entire background with this image of a jungle. I'm going to reposition, click on crop, let's go to our selection pane, and I'm going to pull the image of the kingfisher in front of the background image, and you can see how effective that looks. Tip 20. QR codes. My final tip is inserting QR codes into your slides. And again, this is one of those PowerPoint add-ins. So maybe I want to insert a QR code into this slide that is going to take people directly to my YouTube channel. So the first thing I need to do here is jump across to YouTube and grab the URL of my channel. Control C to copy. We're then going to go to Insert, Get Add-ins, and type in QR. And it's this one that you want here, QR for Office. Let's add it. And straight away over at the side, you can see I need to enter in my URL. Now this is an HTTPS. I'm going to Control V to paste it in, and I'm going to delete out the front part of that URL. I have some options I can customize here, such as the color and the background. I'm going to leave everything as the default. I'm just going to click Insert, and there I have my QR code. I can resize this, place it on my slide, and now when anyone scans this on their phone, it's going to jump them straight across to my YouTube channel. So that's it, guys. Those are my top 20 PowerPoint hacks for 2021. I hope you found some things in there that are going to be useful to you, and I also hope you discovered some new things that PowerPoint can do. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button, consider subscribing, and click the bell icon so that you can receive notifications when I upload a new video. That's it for now, guys. I will see you next time.